Here are the 4 greatest proofs that Jesus truly rose from the dead, and the 4th one cannot be refuted by anyone. Historical records, eyewitness testimonies, and even hostile sources confirm what billions of people have proclaimed for over 2,000 years. Skeptics have tried for centuries to discredit the resurrection, but the evidence is undeniable. Before we discuss the resurrection, we must ask, did Jesus really die? If he didn't, then everything else collapses. But nearly all scholars, including skeptical historians, agree on one fact: Jesus was dead after the crucifixion. The Romans were execution experts, and crucifixion wasn't just punishment, it was designed to ensure death. The idea that Jesus survived contradicts both historical and medical evidence. Roman crucifixion was brutal. Before even reaching the cross, Jesus was flogged with a whip embedded with bone and metal. This scourging alone was often fatal, as it tore flesh and exposed bones. By the time he carried his cross to Golgotha, he was in critical condition. No one endured such torture and lived. The Romans made sure of that. The method of execution was designed for suffocation. With arms stretched out, the victim had to push up on nailed feet to breathe. Over time, exhaustion and organ failure set in. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a study confirming that crucifixion leads to cardiac arrest. Jesus' death wasn't just probable, it was medically inevitable. Some claim Jesus merely fainted, but this is absurd. How could a man who had been whipped, nailed to a cross, and pierced in the side suddenly wake up, roll away a massive stone, and defeat trained Roman guards? That would be more miraculous than the resurrection itself. The swoon theory is easily debunked. Even hostile sources confirm his death. The Jewish Talmud and Roman records acknowledge his execution. A Roman soldier even stabbed his side, and the Bible records that blood and water flowed out. Medically, this indicates heart failure. If Jesus had been alive, this wouldn't have happened. His death was beyond doubt. The Gospel of John specifically notes the spear wound as proof of his death. Roman executioners didn't take chances. If they failed to kill a prisoner, their own lives were at risk. They had one job: ensuring that Jesus died. If they confirmed it, there's no reason to doubt it. Jesus wasn't unconscious. He was completely dead. Some say Jesus' body was removed early, but this doesn't change the facts. Pilate only allowed the body to be taken after confirming his death with the centurion. Roman law ensured that executions were thoroughly completed. No one escaped a Roman cross. The idea that Jesus did is pure fiction. Even modern medical experts confirm it. Crucifixion leads to fatal trauma, hypovolemic shock, and respiratory failure. No one in such a state could survive, let alone move a heavy tombstone days later. The facts are undeniable: Jesus' body had completely shut down. His death was real. Skeptics sometimes argue that Jesus' disciples fabricated his death. But why would they do that? A fake resurrection would require a real death first. If Jesus hadn't died, Christianity would have collapsed instantly. The disciples were willing to die for this truth. They knew Jesus was truly dead. This is why the resurrection matters. If Jesus' death is certain, then what happened next demands explanation. The empty tomb, the eyewitness accounts, and the radical transformation of his followers all hinge on this moment. And if he really died, we must ask, what happened 3 days later? Second proof: ancient accounts of the resurrection. The resurrection of Jesus wasn't a belief that developed over centuries, it was proclaimed immediately after his death. One of the most astonishing pieces of evidence is a creed recorded in 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3-7, dated just months after the crucifixion. Even skeptical scholars recognize this as one of the earliest Christian traditions. This means the resurrection wasn't a legend, it was central from the very beginning. Paul, writing in the mid-50s AD, says he received this teaching, meaning it predates even his own letters. Historians agree this places the resurrection message within just a few years, perhaps even months, of Jesus' death. In ancient history, that is unheard of. Myths take generations to form, yet the resurrection was preached immediately. This is not how fables develop, it's how eyewitness accounts are preserved. This creed names specific eyewitnesses: Peter, James, the 12, and over 500 people who saw Jesus alive. Paul challenges his readers, stating that most of these witnesses were still alive. Why does this matter? Because it means the resurrection claim could be verified. If it was false, the lie would have collapsed instantly. Even sources outside the Bible confirm that the early Christians believed in the resurrection. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, recorded that Christians claimed Jesus had risen. The Talmud acknowledges that his followers spread this message. Even Roman writers like Tacitus and Pliny the Younger confirm that early Christians were willing to die rather than renounce their belief in Jesus' resurrection. If the resurrection were fabricated, why didn't the authorities simply present Jesus' body? The easiest way to disprove Christianity would have been to show his dead body. But they couldn't. The earliest historical records confirm that the tomb was empty, and the disciples' unwavering commitment to this truth led to their persecution and martyrdom. What's even more compelling is that Jesus' resurrection was proclaimed in Jerusalem, the very city where he was executed. If the body had been in the tomb, the message wouldn't have spread. But instead, the resurrection was preached boldly in the same place where Jesus had died, and no one could refute it. That speaks volumes. The idea that the resurrection was a later invention contradicts all historical evidence. The early church grew explosively because people believed they had seen Jesus alive. Many of these people were willing to die rather than deny what they witnessed. No one willingly dies for a lie they know is false. The consistency of the resurrection accounts also reinforces their reliability. Even though the Gospels were written independently, they all affirm the same core truth: Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. Such consistency among multiple sources is rare in ancient history. This strengthens the case for the authenticity of these testimonies. Some skeptics argue that the resurrection was a hallucination. But hallucinations are personal experiences. They don't happen to 500 people at once. Mass visions of the same event at different times and locations defy psychological explanations. Something extraordinary happened that changed the course of history. Third proof: eyewitness accounts of the resurrection. When investigating any historical event, eyewitness testimony is the strongest type of evidence. And when it comes to Jesus' resurrection, the sheer amount of testimony is overwhelming. The New Testament contains at least 9 independent sources affirming that Jesus' disciples truly believed they had seen him alive. This is a crucial point. Multiple independent sources make a claim significantly stronger. The Gospels describe several appearances of Jesus after his death. Mary Magdalene, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and the apostles all claimed to have seen him. These were not distant visions or mystical experiences but physical interactions. Jesus ate with them, spoke to them, and even let them touch his wounds. Hallucinations do not invite people to place their hands in their scars. Paul's testimony in 1 Corinthians 15 is particularly powerful. He states that Jesus appeared to over 500 people at once, most of whom were still alive when he wrote this letter. This means his readers could have verified the claim. If it were false, the lie would have been easily exposed, yet the resurrection message only gained strength. The fact that hostile sources confirm the spread of this belief adds even more credibility. The Jewish historian Josephus, the Roman senator Tacitus, and even the Talmud acknowledge that Jesus' followers were spreading the claim of his resurrection. This demonstrates that the message wasn't an invention centuries later, it was the core of Christianity from the beginning. Skeptics propose that the disciples lied or conspired to create a hoax. But this theory is absurd. Who willingly dies for a lie they know is false? Every apostle, except John, faced torture and execution for proclaiming the resurrection. If they had fabricated the story, someone would have confessed under pressure. No one recanted. The diversity of the eyewitnesses strengthens the argument. Jesus appeared to men and women, individuals and large groups, doubters and believers. Even his brother James, who initially rejected him, became a leader in the church after seeing the risen Jesus. The same happened with Paul, a persecutor of Christians who had a radical transformation. If the resurrection was a hallucination, how could so many people experience the same vision at different times and places? Hallucinations are personal, they don't happen to multiple people at once. Psychologists confirm that mass hallucinations of this nature are impossible. Something extraordinary must have happened. Even Jesus' enemies confirmed that his followers were convinced of his resurrection. The Roman authorities persecuted Christians, yet they never tried to disprove their claims with evidence. If they had been able to produce Jesus' body, Christianity would have been crushed immediately. But they couldn't. The impact of the eyewitness testimony is undeniable. The boldness of the disciples after the resurrection stands in stark contrast to their fear before it. Something changed them from cowards who ran away to fearless preachers willing to die. The only logical explanation is that they truly encountered the risen Christ. Fourth proof, the empty tomb. One of the most undeniable facts about Jesus' resurrection is the empty tomb. Even his enemies never denied that his body was missing. Instead of refuting it, they tried to explain it away. The earliest Jewish sources admit the tomb was empty but claim that the disciples stole the body. However, this explanation collapses under historical scrutiny. The disciples were not expecting a resurrection. After Jesus' death, they were hiding in fear, believing everything was over. How could this terrified group suddenly gain the courage to steal his body? More importantly, how could they overpower trained Roman guards at the tomb? This theory makes no sense. The tomb was sealed and guarded by Roman soldiers, who were experts in combat. If they had allowed anyone to steal the body, they would have faced execution. A group of unarmed fishermen outmaneuvering these elite soldiers is simply unrealistic. The stolen body explanation doesn't hold up. Women were the first to witness the empty tomb. This is significant because, in the ancient world, a woman's testimony was considered unreliable. If the resurrection story were fabricated, no one would have invented female witnesses. The only reason to include this detail is because it actually happened. If Jesus' body had remained in the tomb, the Jewish and Roman authorities would have displayed it publicly to end Christianity immediately. But they never did. Instead, the disciples boldly preached about the resurrection in Jerusalem, the very place where Jesus was crucified. If the tomb had not been empty, their message would have been disproven instantly. The Jewish leaders had every reason to silence the disciples. They even bribed the Roman guards, instructing them to spread the story that Jesus' body was stolen while they were asleep. But this excuse raises another problem. How could they know what happened if they were asleep? Their story contradicts itself. Ancient historians, including Josephus and Tacitus, confirm that the early Christians preached that Jesus rose from the dead. If the resurrection were a fabrication, why did Christianity explode throughout the Roman Empire so quickly? The only explanation that fits the evidence is that something extraordinary happened. The tomb's location was well known. If Jesus' body had been moved, it would have been easy to find. Christianity grew in Jerusalem, where anyone could have investigated the tomb for themselves. The fact that no one ever produced his body speaks volumes. Even skeptics like Bart Ehrman admit that the empty tomb is one of the strongest pieces of historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection. Critics offer alternative explanations, but none hold up under serious analysis. The facts remain: Jesus was buried, his tomb was found empty, and no one could explain why. So what does this mean for us today? If Jesus truly rose from the dead, then his words carry eternal significance. The empty tomb is more than just an ancient mystery, it's a challenge to every person to consider who Jesus really is. We've examined 4 irrefutable proofs of Jesus' resurrection: his death, ancient accounts, eyewitness testimonies, and the empty tomb. The evidence is overwhelming. But facts alone don't change lives, decisions do. If Jesus truly rose from the dead, then everything he said matters. His resurrection proves that death is not the end and that he holds the power over life itself. Now, ask yourself, what will you do with this truth? You can ignore it, dismiss it, or accept it. But what you can't do is remain indifferent. The resurrection of Jesus isn't just a historical event, it's a challenge to every heart. If he conquered death, then his promises are real. And that means eternity is at stake. No one can make this decision for you. You've seen the evidence, now it's time to respond. Will you seek Jesus, or will you turn away? Whatever you choose, know this: ignoring the truth doesn't make it disappear. If Jesus is alive, then he is exactly who he claimed to be, the Son of God and the Savior of the world. If this message impacted you, leave a comment below. Let's continue this conversation. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you never miss powerful content like this. Thank you for watching, and may you discover the truth for yourself. See you in the next video.